webinar. Today we have a great speaker who's going to talk on auditor's role during data migration. Today we have implementing new systems, upgrading our legacy system to ERP system, and we are also helping our clients, internal as well as external, to ensure that this changeover happens smoothly. Today we have Mr. Chetan Maheshwari. He is Promoter Director of Audit and Information Systems Private Limited. He is associated with IA for a very long time. With this, now uh, I give the control to Chetan, our today's speaker. Chetan, here
Sure.
you goes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Manoj. All right. Good morning to all of you. Good afternoon to some of you. I see that we are on different time zones, and I'm also thankful to those who are there early in the morning. So really nice to see that a lot of them have connected, and especially on a holiday. Yes, I'm sorry. Can you all? So I think I'm audible now, right? And again, my best wishes for this lovely Friday morning to all of you. So what we are going to do today is to understand our role on this very important subject, and the agenda as it goes now that you will see on your screen is what is the role that an auditor is going to play during the data migration. So when we look at migration, there may be a lot of migrations that have been talked about. So there may be migration of systems, there may be migration of your application, there may be migrations from your infrastructure or hardware being migrated from one platform to another, right? So on and so forth. But especially our focus today for today's session is going to be the data which gets migrated during different scenarios, and we will also see those scenarios as we move along. What we have done and what we have added also as a part of the process for the first time in this webinar is also what we call as panel questions. Right, so we will be having some survey questions which will be broadcasted on your screen during the discussion, and I request all of you to participate into those questions, and you can be rest assured that this will be used only for the discussion purpose today, and they are not meant to be used later on, those service questions. And secondly, it also has an option of not sure being there, but I request that all of you use the best judgment to give the answers on that, so that we can build our discussion during the presentation with the help of those surveys as well. So taking it forward, this is what we have as an agenda for an hour that we will be spending together, and of course followed up by question and answers later on during the session. So data migration assurance, why do we need it, when do we need it the most, what do we do in the assurance process, what are some of the best practices that we have learned over a period of time, which we will be happy to share. The methodology, the auditor's role in this, and the reason why we are all in this discussion today. Some scenarios, the migration scenarios, of course, followed by a short case study and then Q&A. Thank you once again, and let's take on with the subject now. So the question is, why data migration assurance, right? And for sure, we all know that data is the most critical asset for any organization, right? And the integrity of data has to be assured, has to be ensured at all the stages where the data is within the system. Especially when it changes hands, when it moves from one platform to another, when it moves from one system to another, when it gets moved from one platform to another, and we'll see those scenarios moving forward. So the most important part is, yes, the data is the most critical asset for any organization, and to have an assurance on that is an important subject. The second one, right, as you see, and this has been researched a lot, that the errors, if data errors gets into the system, then they are 20 times more expensive to correct. Otherwise, if they are identified early in the cycle, when they are getting migrated. So it is also very important that we see that as an auditor, where do we play a role, or where do we get involved, at what stage, so that we can prevent this loss, or we can actually see how we can have a matured and better system when the data gets migrated. Third, and which is very important for all of us to know, that as the data and erroneous data gets into the system, this may lead to revenue leakage. This will lead to a cascading effect on the decision-making process. So an error can lead to another error, and so on and so forth. We see a lot of organizations land up into a lot of regulatory challenge because of wrong data being presented to regulators. And most of the time, the root cause says that during migration, the data errors got into the system. So it's a very important subject. It's a burning subject at this time. And I'm thankful to IAA for having this session and all of us on this discussion. Lastly, we are also seeing that a lot of regulators have come up, especially in India for banks. Reserve Bank of India has made it essential for large-size private sectors and public sector banks to carry out data migration assurance as an activity for all critical applications. We see a lot of statutory auditor reports requesting organizations to get the assurance done before they sign the financial accounts. So we are seeing that there is a lot of interest and knowledge which has come up on this subject, but people want the assurance to be there. So why, I think, is clear, and we all will appreciate that yes, it is important for us to get there. Right. Now let us look at the next, which is on when do we take this activity. When is it that the risk of data integrity is very high? So the principal thumb rule is anytime when we believe that the data changes hands from one system to another, or one module to another, yes, it is the integrity of the data is very high, the challenges are very high, and it is important to have an assurance there. But the risk of data loss that we have seen, or the integrity loss that we have seen, is high in the scenarios that we have mentioned there. When we move from one system to another, right, which essentially means, for an example, that we move from a legacy system or the one that we have been using to a new system or to an ERP or a core system. So there's a data, a big migration approach which has been which gets adopted by the organization. They move from one platform to another, sometimes from one vendor to another vendor, right? So it's a major change for an organization. It's a complete application change, it's an infrastructure change, and that is the time when we see that the data which is in the legacy system or the old system gets moved into the newer technology, newer platform, newer systems, right? And the integrity loss is very high. The probability of that loss is very high. Another big data migration process that we are seeing in a lot of organizations now is when they migrate from one version of a system to a major release or a major version of another system. So we are not talking about the Delta version, which is 3.1 to 3.2 or 3.3 kind of thing, but we are talking of major release. So from a manufacturing standpoint, those who were on SAP, they will realize that when they move from 4.7 on SAP to 6.3 ECC Unicode application, or for those which are from the banking or other financial institutions where they saw moving from Finacle 7 to Finacle 10, those kind of migrations, those kind of version upgrades are major version upgrades. Right, where the structure, even though the vendors are same, probably the structures of the applications and the way the data gets stored in the applications are different, and hence the need to have an assurance that the data which gets migrated from one version to another is maintaining the data integrity part. Third scenario, another very interesting scenario, and most of the organizations are building up what we call as a data warehouse, or they are building up central repositories of data, and this is going to be used for all their future purposes as far as the management intelligence systems are concerned, or reporting to the regulators are concerned, and so on and so forth. So we see multiple systems pushing their data into a central warehouse. Now again the question still remains that when data comes from multiple systems into a central warehousing, a central data repository, and if there is a data integrity loss, this will be very expensive for the organization, because all the intelligence will then be taken out of this warehousing project. Again, a very interesting and an important aspect for all of us as an auditor to see, the integrity is maintained at all these 3 layers. So as I said, that anytime when a data moves or changes hand, it is important to look at it. But these are some of the scenarios that we thought probably are eye-openers, and if you all are part of these scenarios, and if you see that either one of them is happening within the organization, then I'm sure that this discussion will have a lot of value today. At this juncture, what I will request is we take some survey questions, right, about 2 of them, so that we see we all come on par and we know that what is it that we are seeing in our scenarios. And I will request Manoj to probably give you the survey questions. Right. So it's an online survey, and I request you to kindly give your opinion on that. And we will be compiling this results right now. And if possible, we will also flash it to you.
Here comes the survey. So you can give your votes or selections.
So we have both the survey questions at this time.
Yes, we have in another 5 seconds I'm closing the survey.
Okay.
I'm closing the survey. Okay, now is it time for survey number 2. Five seconds more. Okay, server is closing. Chetan, would you like to show the survey?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Here comes the survey number 1. About 27% has voted about 90% of data. 36% voted 75 to 90% of data. Balance are below that.
Okay.
And we have the second survey. The 49% has voted for process business owner, and 33% voted for CIO and head IT. So again, come back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. right? And thank you all for this service. So essentially, what we see that most of us who are in this discussion today, around 60% plus believe that data is the most critical asset for their organization, and which is very important for us to take this discussion forward. Another interesting point here is we still have a question between all of us that who's responsible for this activity. Right, so we are still not clear. We believe process owner is responsible, and some of us believe that IT is responsible for this. And this is industry-wide challenge or a question which is running on, right? Because process owner always says that we are not involved in the IT process. We really don't know how the data is going to be migrated, but it is my data. IT people always comes up and say that how are we to decide what are critical fields and what are the ones which needs to go into the system, and it's the process fellow who have to give us the guidance on that, and so on and so forth. So is that the auditor who's going to bridge, and fortunately I see that most of us believe that it is not the auditor's responsibility, right? But we will still see what is the role that we will have to play in this critical phase that we are all in. So essentially, getting back to the perspective of what is the data migration assurance. So it is a process. So we have seen that data migration is a critical phase for the organization, and assurance is a process which helps in providing that assurance to all the stakeholders. Right now, it can be an IT, it can be the business owners, or it can be your audit committee heads, or the statutory auditors. It can be any stakeholders that we're talking about. Right, that the migrated data from the source to the target is complete, arithmetically accurate, and it's correct data which has gone into the system. So completeness here means that when we talk about the name that was there in the old system has absolutely gone dot by dot, name by name, letter by letter into the same system completely, and there's no truncation which has happened, there's no addition which has happened. Arithmetical accuracy, most of the time you will see, and when you deep dive into the migration process, you will see that a lot of computation happens to the data. It does not go as is into the new environment. Right? There are changes which happens. There are some joinings of table which takes place. The data gets into a different format when it gets into the new system, and it is important to see that when they are transformed, the arithmetical accuracy of those data are maintained, and of course the correctness of the data. It is also important to see that during this process, you also provide an assurance on the method or the process that has been adopted by the organization. And we'll spend some time on the process aspect. That's the place where an auditor plays a very significant role to ensure that when the migration takes place, it is as per the best practices and policies. So we'll spend some time on the process to understand, what is the role there, and what are the kind of documentations that you can look in, and so on and so forth. Another important point is to have a complete independence on this process. Right? So what we see by and large is if there is an error which gets into the process, we find that there are no takers to take the responsibility or ownership of the error which have gone into the system. Now that is where an auditor plays a very important role of being an independent third party to see how things have progressed and where things have not gone right or as perceived, and then give an assurance to the organization. Last but not the least, it is the job to provide a report highlighting the data migrated in targeted systems, and actually you can, with the help of tools, you can do at field level, you can look at numerics, you can look at text, you can look at log files, you can look at date files, so on and so forth. So there's virtually no limitation on the kind of data that you can look in when you're doing this process. So we will actually deep dive now into the process part of it to see, as an auditor, what is it that we can provide value to the organization. So this is a typical W formula or a format that we see or we call as a V process. This is the process which is by and large adopted by the company or by the internal IT resources when they are migrating the data from one platform to another. So they may have a migration strategy. When I say migration strategy, it is more to do with what data to move, whether to move only the closing balances or to move the last 2 years transactions along with the balances, or to move only limited accounts which are open accounts, or so on and so forth. So all those part of the strategy is the migration strategy. It also talks about when to move this data, whether we want to do a big bang approach or we want to go modular by modular, so on and so forth. So this is the document which gets prepared at the early cycle of the migration, where the IT, the business owners are supposed to sit together and to identify what strategy are they going to adopt when they're looking at migrating the data from either one platform to another or one version to another, or from the centralized system to warehousing. Then they build a migration tool. This will help them to convert or to migrate the data from the hex system to the Y system that we are looking at. Then they carry out some testing on that to do it, which is the pre-rollout or UAT phase. Some corrections on the tool if they identify certain bugs or anomalies, and then of course finally the rollout. So this is the process that they are going to adopt. We believe the best practice for an auditor would be to run parallel to this process. By and large, our experience says that the auditor gets involved after the rollout is done, which is the last phase, and they come into place, and the management requests them that why don't you now verify, look at the data we have already migrated into the system, and why don't you look at data and tell us that whether everything has gone correct into the system or not, which we call as a post-migration assurance. But by and large, our opinion is, as we have also looked in the slide previously, if that happens, then about 20% more expensive is this to do it in the post-migration environment. More so, what we see that the auditor only gets involved into looking at some balance verification, some GL level verifications, or the subtotals at the ledger level or a trial balance layer, right, which essentially brings down the scope of work. And it is not necessary that even if your general balances get tallied, the data accuracies are there in the system. So we have come across very large scenarios, and I'll take just one example here to give you an highlight that the GL for a bank tallied, but the classification of the loans under which they were given were wrongly done when they migrated. So most of these housing loans got migrated as educational loans, and suddenly they had a moratorium period of 3 years, 2 years, which got into the system. So if you look at the GL layer and if you look at the balances layer, probably those have tallied, right? But if you look at the loss to the organization and the kind of pain that they would have gone through to correct all of this, it was immense. So our recommendation to the organization is that if you see that the scenario is on, if the organization is looking at moving data from one system to another, please get involved early in the cycle, which is at the migration process, assurance, or the strategy stage itself. And we'll see what is the value that the auditor can bring at each of these layers that we are talking today. Right? On the migration tool, our take is that since the technology is available today, we also believe that it will be a best part or a best policy or a best practice for an auditor to get into an independent assurance tool themselves. Right? So it can be a co-sourcing if the expertise are not available, or taking an expert into your team and then working, but it will still be an important piece to maintain complete independence and to build your own logic when you are carrying out this activity. Right? And of course, be involved in the pre-migration phase, identify exceptions early in the cycle, help tweak the logic, and then do a post-migration review with the organization. Taking this process, right, line by line, so we are going to look at these 5 processes and the auditor's role in each one of them. So the first one is on the review of the data migration strategy document and to perform a walkthrough of the data migration process. So this is something which comes very natural for an auditor to understand. If the organization has taken a call saying that, okay, we are only going to migrate the closing balances and not the entire data. And if you are involved in the process, question them and see whether that strategy that they have taken makes business sense, or there is a possibility of some kind of loss happening to the organization, or a risk that is probably not understood by the business owners or technology when they have taken this kind of decision. what is the process that they are going to adopt? Are there intermediary systems through which the data is going to go, or it is going to go directly from X to Y? Right? If not, then what is the risk that they are going to entail if they are going to migrate from X to a template stage, from another template to another template, and from there finally to the destination systems? Identify what are the processes that they have adopted for documentation of all this activity, who all are the stakeholders who have given their sign off on their system, so that they cannot backtrack and they cannot come back and say that they have not been involved or they did not understand this process well. What have been the data migration or what we call as backup strategies that they have adopted during this process? Uh, you know, by and large, we have seen people move the data, but unfortunately, the old data backups are not maintained by the organization, and if they want to revert to the old data for any kind of activities, then it becomes very difficult for them to do that. Again, a big question that an auditor can get involved and look at that, so on and so forth. So a lot of things, a lot of value that auditor can bring at this stage to validate all of that which is getting into the system, and to give a lot of intelligence to the management and to all the other stakeholders on the process that has been adopted by them. And if possible, do a walkthrough. Try and understand, what is it that they are planning to do. Right. With this, the value additions that can be given by an auditor is, first, you can help them to identify the gaps that you are seeing in the process. If you believe that certain stakeholders have not been involved, the sign-offs have not been in place, the data retention policies are not in place, right? The data governance issues have not been addressed, the data quality issues have not been addressed before we are migrating, the timing of migration probably may not be right, so on and so forth. So, there can be a lot of questions that auditors can ask and to see if there are gaps in the process, and can guide the organization on those gaps. Second is, you can also benchmark these with the best practices. So, you can actually collect some intelligence and information and say that, what has been done by the competing organizations, or what has been the best practices that has been published industry-wise, and guide the organization on whether they are on the best practices. So whether a big bang approach will be a big best practice, or whether modular can be an easy way of achieving this target, or so on and so forth. Right. And of course, as part of our role, it is not only to identify but also to give suitable recommendations to bridge this gap. The first is a very important phase for this process and auditors being involved. Unfortunately, since this has not evolved in the way that the industry is looking at auditors' role, but I think it is important for all of us who are here in a session, to really see that auditors can make a very significant difference in their involved early design. Now, this is a phase where an independent assurance tool. So essentially, what we have seen by and large is, because this is a technical phase, we see that the auditors sometimes believe that whether we should be part of this phase, or we should leave it for the technology team and the IT team to actually build the tools for migrating the data from X to Y as a system. Our recommendation, the best practices, says that it is always important for an auditor to maintain the independence and to use tools themselves. Now, this can be in a co-sourcing mode, or this can be taking an expert on their panel and executing. So I'm not getting into the methodology or how are you going to address this, but it is important that when they say that this logic is going to be transformed like this into the new system, it is important that you also have a tool which can help you transform this logic and see if they have done it correctly or not. So rather only being dependent on whatever that they have built, it is also important that you look at it yourself through the help of tool. So what can this bring to auditors? So this can bring your independent migration logic. You can build your own. Now, the value that you can give to the organization is, you are not dependent on the logic that has been built by technology. So if tomorrow someone says that you have looked at reports from the old and the new systems, and are you happy with it? The answer is yes, I have looked at the reports, but I am still not sure whether the logic that has been used to build these reports are right or wrong. In an independent process, you can be more assured of this activity. and of course, the results are also very accurate. Second and the most important aspect of this is the reusability aspect of it, right? So what becomes important here at this phase is that if you build a tool, then you are in the position to keep using it during the process of migration. So if the organization goes for 3 rounds or 4 rounds of iteration during this process, you are also equipped to work in conjunction, in parallel with the organization, because you have built logics around the tools. Right? Last and most important part is that this knowledge can be retained with the auditors for further usability as well. So let us assume that the technology has moved from a legacy system to a new system, and you have built the tools where you have verified the data accuracy in the new system. Now from the new system, the management thinks that we want to get into a data warehousing system. So this knowledge that you have built of the new system or the tool can now be used when the organization is looking at verifying data from the new system to the warehousing system. Right? So it is not only for the phase or the period in which the migration is. This is something that can be built as an asset and can be used by auditor for a long-term objective within the organization. The next two phase, I have purposely combined because these are iterative phase, which is you are giving the assurance and you are doing the correction, and then you do keep doing this till the time you believe that the organization has really come to a point where they have built a correct logic to be migrated into the system, right? So on purpose we have taken both these phases together. So this is the phase when you start identifying what are the critical data fields, right? Not 100% of data is something that will be feasible to be verified, right? So what you can do with the help of tool is you can identify critical fields, and those critical fields you can do 100% verification of. This can be financial, this can be non-financial, this can be date, this can be text, this can be log files, so on and so forth. Right. So what this phase can help the organization is, since you have used the tools and since you are in the position to keep repeatedly doing this activity time and again, this will help the organization to keep refining the logics that are built so as to achieve a higher level of confidence before they migrate their data into the new system. Right. So the objective of the auditor here is to reduce the number of anomalies before you go live, and to keep fine-tuning the migration logic that has been built by the technology team here. Another very interesting phase, and as you see, you get involved into this, you'll see that this gets into a more partnership mode with the technology. They are very happy because they are involved with so many activities at the same time. They have to look at the application, they have to look at the infrastructure, the hardware side, the performance side, so on and so forth. And you have taken one of the biggest challenges out of their head, from the data assurance point of view. So I have seen that this gets into a very positive discussions and positive associations with the entire stakeholders within the organization, if auditor or with the help of third-party auditors can get involved in this phase. Last but not the least, the most important one is on the post-migration assurance piece. So the data is now ready, and you have done the verification in the pre-UAT phase, or where the test goes on, and now the day has come when the data is going to be migrated into the new system. Right. Now, since you have already built the tools, you have built the logic with you, the auditor is confident on the systems which are going to be migrated. Immediately after post-migration, you can do a quick verification of critical fields and give the organization an assurance saying that yes, it is good to go now. Right? It is now ready to make it public. Your systems are now open for people to take it up, so on and so forth. So this is the confidence that an auditor can give before go live. So what we are talking about is the organization has migrated, put it into the new system, right? And before they say go live and let the customers and everyone start interacting, right? The auditors are in the position to give this assurance. What we will also do at this stage is, if you look at it, the value additions that the auditors can bring is, of course, 100% of the data that is very very critical for the organization can be verified in this space, and with the automation capabilities as we discussed, this can be done fast and accurately for the organization. So by and large, what we have seen in this 5 slides or 6 slides that we have gone through is, the auditor's role being involved in this phase, being involved early in the cycle rather than being involved only post-mortem and after the data inaccuracies have gone into the system, and we come after 3 to 6 months time where everyone is living into the environment, right? We are seeing that how we can push our role early, how we can add value in this process, so on and so forth. Right. At this stage, we will also take a pause here and get into some more survey questions, which may help us to move further in our discussion. So, what we will do post this is get into the different scenarios that we discussed early in our slides, and what are the critical challenges and what will be the critical success factor. But before we take up on that, Manoj, can we have some survey questions further for the discussions that we had so far?
Yes, I am launching our third survey. I'm closing the survey, sharing it. So we have 53% saying yes, they have. Rest, we are not sure or they don't have.
All right.
Now, the next survey. Does your organization have a clear data migration assurance with framework and policy in place? Closing the survey, sharing the survey. So we have 83% we don't have the policy or framework organization for this. Next survey. In the past, have you or has the organization taken data migration steps during any major migration project? closing the survey, sharing. So here we have good thing. 31% were involved in giving assurance manually, and another 31% with some bits of automation, so 62%, which is a good number.
All right.
So Chetan,
Yeah, thank you, Manoj. And I really thank all the participants for giving a very honest assessment of these questions. As I repeat, this will be maintained only for this discussion purpose, and this has got nothing to do with sharing with any one of us on this board. So, which essentially, if we all have seen these results ourselves, it says that less than 20% by and large of us are the one who believe that we have matured. So we are over. We're close to about 70 to 100 participants today, and we all believe only 20% of us are of the opinion that we have a standard policy or a process assurance document, or we have an automated process of looking at data migration assurance as a process, right? And which is the case that we see by and large within the industry as well. So we all know that it's a very critical component, right? We saw about 71% of us believe that it's a very critical component. Data is very critical for the organization, and we all need to take care of it. And at the same time, we see that only about 15 to 20% of us, we believe that there are proper processes that has been established so far as to bring the assurance on the data migration. So what we will do quickly is, now taking this discussion forward, we will see what are the different scenarios, and what I have done is with our experience in this area, I have taken up only some challenges, the major challenges that we see in this area, and what will be the critical success factor to mitigate these challenges, right? So I'm sure this is something that the auditors will take it in a positive strand, and it should help all of us. So these are the three scenarios that we'll be discussing, and this is what we also had on our early slide. One is to move from legacy to a new solution. What are the challenges there? A version migration, what are the challenges there? And of course, on the from a centralized system to warehousing system. Since we are running short on time, I will take this discussion as we come on each slide one by one. Right. So legacy to new system. Right. The biggest challenge when I see from a legacy system to a new system is we are talking of multiple legacy systems. Right? When we get centralized, probably most of our processes are all going to be part of one system. But if I look at legacy, probably HR is outside, the vendor management is outside, the CRM systems are outside. Something is happening on the sales purchase side, but our balance sheets are outside, and now we are saying that all of that has to come into one ERP system that we are going to build now. Right? Or if we look at banking, then we see, or if you look at insurance, then we see that there are so many systems that were there previously in the legacy stage, but now we are venturing to bring all of them together, which essentially means that all these legacies have different data sets, they have different applications, they have different ways in which they have been entered into the system, and now we want all of them to come on one platform. A big challenge. Second, the data availability which is required by the new system and the data which is available in the old system is always a big mismatch. Right. So, for instance, for a new system, they may say that if these fields are not filled enough, then the application will not apply, or the application will not accept the data points. But not necessarily that these were compulsory fields in your legacy application. So we see a big difference, when we do a data mapping and when auditor gets involved to see that, okay, these are compulsory areas. Let us say date is a compulsory field, date of birth is a compulsory field when you want to migrate a customer detail into the system, but probably that was not a compulsory field in legacy system, and we don't see dates being there. Third and the most bothering, I would say, in this is the vendors. Right? because legacy vendors are going to move out of your business systems. They are not the one who are going to be there, right? Now, what essentially it means that they have no motivation because they are not going to continue with your organization now. You have identified a new vendor who is going to take over these systems and applications from them. Now, to manage that vendor at this stage becomes very difficult for the organization. Right. That is what is very critical at this stage for an auditor to see that these are some of the key challenges that we see which comes up during this phase. Now, what are the success factors? Right. One is that you need to really have a good techno-functional expert within your team, so that the mapping of the legacy systems, the mapping of the fields, understanding of that, what is a critical field, how it is going to move into this system, so on and so forth, is very well taken care. You need to also ensure that there are proper backup strategies here, because as I said, the vendor is not going to be there moving tomorrow. So it's important at least the data is there, and if there is any challenge, you can roll back to the old system. You have a strong strategy document in place, and we discussed about that, so I will not dwell more on that, but it is also very important that all the stakeholders sign to it, they give their commitment on this migration. And of course, the last one, which is very important, is to have a proper project management skills, because we'll see a lot of vendors, right, who are going to have to be migrated to new system, and we'll have to manage all of them at the same site at the same time. Right. We also have some questions which have come up, and it will be only fair that I pick up one or two of them at this stage. Let me give it a try. But the first question says that if the client provides an in-house certificate that the migration has happened satisfactorily, should the external auditor accept that or carry out some own checks also? An excellent question. It has come from Vikram. So Vikram, I appreciate this point, and all our studies being chartered accountant is based on the information provided and the documentation submitted by the customer. But the time has changed now, and I essentially believe that it will be prudent for us to also carry out at least some basic checks to see that the migration process has not resulted into a big gaps in the system. Right, so the scenarios are changing now, and I would recommend that it will be good that we also do some checks on our own. Now, what will be the scope of that check and how limited it can be, and whether we look at only some critical fields, those are the part of the audit charter. But the recommendation is very heavy, because ultimately you are going to sign if you are the statutory auditors, and if there is a big exception that gets into the system, then it will be an equal responsibility on your side. Right. Thanks for this question. I'll take another one, which says that what happens when the data structure between legacy system and the new ERP does not match, and hence all the operational data cannot be transferred into the new system? This is from Kaushal Patel. Another excellent question. Yes, and that's the big challenge. That is where I have written there. And what happens is, to bring it to the new platform, people get into templates, right? So you have a migration which is not happening from X to Y directly, but you have X to X1, X1 to Y1, and Y1 to Y, right? So there are 2 or 3 templates which gets involved, and everyone within the organization believes that this migration is the right strategy to happen. But you will see that the data losses, the integrated losses starts happening when they move from templates to templates internally. And worst part is that these templates are by and large an Excel file, right, which creates all the more complications and the data integrity issues within the organization. So very critical phase, and that is where we believe that having a techno-functional expert within your team should be the right combination. We understand what we are migrating, and of course the use of tool can be very handy at this phase. Right. Right, and we'll take some of these as we progress later on. So we'll move, and thanks again for these questions. We will take them a little later as well. Yeah. So let's look at the second scenario. The second scenario is when we are moving from the core version X to a new version, right? Which means your vendor by and large is same, right? So there's no risk on the vendor side, the one that we saw in the legacy system where the vendor is moving out of the system. But what we see is when we talk about the core systems and essentially the large systems that we look at, so we talked about manufacturing from 4.7 to 6.3, or when we are looking at scenarios where we are looking at banking moving from Finacle 7 to Finacle 10, right? So on and so forth. Right now, the big challenge is the high volumes of data which is there. Now we are talking about a version which is already centralized, and we are talking about all the businesses already on into the system. So there's huge volume of data which is involved, and now you cannot say that I will go module by module. You will have to upgrade the version as a whole, which means that all the data from the system will have to go live into another system at one go. Huge volumes of data are involved. Second, and the most important thing is that the post-migration window is very low, right? Which essentially means that once you have migrated the system, probably late night on a Sunday, early Monday morning, the system should be available to people at work, right? Which means that I, as an assurance partner to the process, gets very little time to give an assurance that yes, the systems are, the data is migrated properly, and so on and so forth. Another big challenge with this. The third one is on online migration. Now, what do we mean by online migrations? If you see most of these systems, the core systems, they provide a lot of facilities to the vendors, to the customers to do online business. Right. So if I look at a banking scenario, the data is getting migrated, but you cannot stop a customer who's 24/7 on internet and who wants to migrate or who wants to carry out a transaction. Your ATMs are online, your internet banking is online, your mobile banking is online, right? So which means that I want to move data from one system to another, but the question still remains that how do I handle these online transactions which are happening, right? If I look at most of the ERPs in the manufacturing side or the retail side or the trade side, right? The online transactions are on. So if I want to say that Clear Trip tomorrow wants to migrate the data from or upgrade its system from one to another, they cannot say that hold on, you don't book your tickets today because I am moving my application from one platform to another, right? So how do we handle those kind of an online migration challenges, right? Because the business will still continue and they have to still upgrade. So that's an important area for an auditor to look at. Right. So what are the critical success factors? Right. One is that I have seen that since this is a huge volume exercise, it is also important to ensure that for the assurance process we have good hardware which is available to do the verification. Right. So it is important that you get the buy-in within the organization, tell the IT teams and the stakeholders that for assurance also we need an equal hardware infrastructure to give this kind of an assurance. Identify your business critical data. It may not be possible to do, since the volumes are very high, it may not be possible to do 100% verification for all, but it is also important that you look at these critical data points and give an assurance on that. Do a pre-migration, do this exercise that we discussed as many times in the test environment before it goes online. Right, have assurance on your strategy document and its version. Right, very important strategy documents are still coming up, as a very critical component here. Split the projects on immediate verifications that you will do when you will go live and what you can do later on. Right, so since the limited window is available for the auditor or assurance, at least do some testing, which can be done in a short span of time, 4 or 5 hours, so that you can give the assurance to the management, right? And of course, last but not the least, again, the project management skills are very important to get these things in place. Right? So these are some of the critical success factors that we see, and we will all appreciate. The challenges when you move from one version to another are completely different. The last scenario in this discussion, which is on the challenges from the core system to a data warehousing system. Right, and I have one or two questions again, which are on the tools and some of the examples on the tools. So good. On the technology side, since we all come from the audit background, you can very well use the CAT tools which are available in the market. So you can use ACL, you can use IDEA, you can use Arbutus as a tool which can be used for these kind of exercises. So these tools have the capability of picking up data from any data source, right? So even if you have a legacy system which is on a COBOL-based system, or if you have legacy systems which are on SQL and you are moving to Oracle, right? These tools have the capabilities of picking up data from any sources, right? So it will be, and CAT tools are meant for auditors to be using for these kind of purposes. So I recommend any tool for that matter can be a good approach. You can look at CAT tools because that is something that we are good at using, and we can use them. They are neither expensive nor they are resource hungry from that perspective, and I'm sure that it will help us in an independent evaluation process, right? Next one is so Harish, thanks for this question. We also have a question from Ganesh Shenoy which says that how does an auditor maintain independence while giving post-migration assurance if he is involved during the pre-migration phase as well? So good question here, Ganesh. The question essentially is there a conflict of role or an interest if you are involved in the pre and a post-migration both, right? So the point here is what you are doing as an exercise is probably the same. Right? So we are not changing your role. We are not saying that you did something in the pre-migration phase and now you're doing something different in the post-migration phase. All that we are saying is, the logic that you have built in the pre-migration where you have assured, and one of the case studies will talk about that, where you have helped the organization to bring down the anomalies or the exceptions. Right? Once they go live, immediately you can use the same tool, the same techniques, because the logic is available with you, to give a final assurance that during this phase, when they were actually moving the data into the new system, no new surprises have come into it, right? So by and large, it is not about you being in the development phase and then you getting into the quality phase or testing. You have always been there in the assurance phase only, right? All that we are saying is, rather than only coming at a later stage and when the garbage has gone into the system, we are saying come early into the cycle of the assurance as well. And we will of course write back on some of these points to you as we see a lot of questions coming in, and we are also running short of time on this. Yeah. So again, coming back to the scenario number 3, which is called database to the warehousing challenges. Right, multiple inputs to a centralized system. So now with data warehousing coming in, everyone wants to see that only one system is being used for MIS. So again, we see multiple systems getting data into one centralized system. Huge volumes. Right, it is even worse than what we saw in the previous phase, which we are talking about one version upgrade. We are talking of multiple systems getting into data warehousing. So again, a big challenge on the volumes. And of course, the same challenge of online transactions which are happening during the migration phase, right? So by and large, the critical success factor still remains the same, right? And again, a very important point on the migration strategy document and its versions, right? And and we saw in the poll that most of us we believe that we don't have the right migration strategy document available with us, or a very comprehensive documentation. So my first recommendation to all auditors who are connected today and those who can discuss with their friends is, if they are into a migration process, please request them to at least get a hand on the document, strategy document, and spend some time to read through that document to see if it is a very comprehensive document covering different scenarios, areas, roles, responsibilities, ownership, so on and so forth within this document. So we'll take a case study right here to just give the entire perspective in place on what we did for one of the organization, and what were the challenges that we saw, and what were the data sizes that we were looking at, and how this was taken up. So it's one of the largest repository of India, one of the largest data bases, one of the large database which was migrated. Sorry. And we were talking about 367 individual units which were also getting migrated at the same time. So this was two migrations. One was the depository themselves were migrating themselves into a new platform, and since they were migrating, they had all their DPs, about 367, also moving their systems at the same time. Right, so it is not only the customer one, but also all their partners, their DP partners, were also migrating at the same time. The size, as we discussed, the size were over a terabyte, right? 900 GB of data which was getting migrated into the new system. It's a huge migration exercise, and the customer said that once we migrate or put it into the new application, the time that you will get to give an assurance is only 16 hours. 16 hours for such a huge and critical application was a big challenge, but they could not keep the system down for that long, and hence it was important for us to accept that kind of timelines. So complexity, as I said, huge volumes of data and limited go live time, right? And the success factors we picked up were the ones that we discussed with all of you a few minutes back. Right. It was very important to identify business critical fields, and that is where the involvement of the process owners, the business owners, the IT, the stakeholders, auditors, all are very important to identify which are these fields which are very critical for us to verify. Now what we did was, since we knew that the go live time is going to be low for us, it was important that we participated with them right from the strategy phase, and also we were there in these cycles, different iterations that we ran through. So what we found in the first scenario was about 25% exceptions of the total population. Right now, just imagine an organization of this nature, if they go into, of course, they would have corrected some of these by their own, but even if they would have landed up with 15%, 20%, or even 10% of exception in the live environment, right, it would have been a big mess for the organization as a whole. Right. So very important that since an auditor was involved in this process early in the cycle, we could independently build a tool and keep running for them in a pre-migration environment time and again. Right. What we came up was only 2% errors, that too into non-critical areas, which essentially was the biggest success factor for the organization. Right. So very important for all of us to appreciate the fact that if an organization goes live without an exception into the database, the life for everyone within the organization is that much more easier to handle. So this is what we thought from a discussion perspective on the data side, right? On the data migration side, that we will pick it up today for this presentation. Right. Of course, there are a lot of questions that has come up, and we'll try and address each one of them as we move along. I will also request Manoj, to tell us how much time do we have so that we can take up more questions now, or do we have to reply to all of you via email? Manoj, are you there with us? And
Hi Chetan, I think we have, if you have a couple of minutes, then we can take up the couple of questions that is with you. So here it comes. Is there a need to have a separate code for all data transfer from legacy to a new system for easy identification in future?
Can you please repeat the question, Manoj?
Is there a need to have a separate code for all data transferred from legacy?
Separate code?
Yeah, so that
Okay.
there is an identification of data which has been migrated and new data which is coming in.
Yeah, so again, this will land up into the same question on what is that legacy data, and how well it is defined into the old system, and whether it is meeting the needs of the new system that we are looking at. Right. So these are all interesting questions, and I'm happy that we have started thinking on those lines. right? That whether we need to maintain the codes, whether what tools there that we need to have, whether we have the right documentation, right ownership from people who have understood the importance of this, so on and so forth. Right, so yes, it's an important piece. You will have to maintain a code. You will have to ensure that the data backups are also there for the old system, because once you migrate into the new system, there may be still a requirement to know how the data have transferred from old systems to the new one, and hence that knowledge will be relevant. Right? So I appreciate that question, and thanks for that as well. Another question that we have got is on the policy document, and people are asking if you can give us some idea on what should be the content on the policy side of the document. So I will take this question just a moment. Right. So the question here is, can there be an example on what is the content of the data migration policy document? So I can give some examples on the content. Essentially the policy document should start from an ownership of who's going to take the ownership, and we should not be in the lurch of understanding whether it's a business process owner or he's the IT person who's involved, or so on and so forth. Right. Another will be the roles and responsibilities of each person who's going to participate in this process, the migration process. We have to look at what are the criticals and the sensitive data. So identification of the sensitivity of the data is also a very important phase, right? And policy document should talk about that. We have to look at the backup procedures, the timelines when we want to do this, what will be the approach, whether it's going to be a big bang approach or whether it's going to be a modular approach, so on and so forth. So the policy document will carry all this information, and should carry all this information. And especially it is very important for an auditor to see if the policy document has entire stakeholders being there and they have their sign-offs in these documents. Right? Please don't accept any policy document which is not signed off by the stakeholders, because this may go for iterations and change, and people may not even know what's the latest one on which they are working. Right? Please ensure that the entire management aspect of the migration is documented well within your policy document. So good, thanks. Another question that we have is, would an auditor require an in-depth IT training to provide the process and the post-migration assurance? Well, yes and no, both. We have seen that as part of your team, if you have someone who's good at using the tools, then it essentially makes a lot of sense to have that resource within the part of this process, because we are talking about something which can really deliver an independent mechanism. But still, this can be a co-source activity, where teams from external team can also participate along with the auditors. So your understanding on the process, your understanding on the business, your understanding on the sensitivity of the data for the organization, your understanding on the stakeholders' responsibility, all of that cannot be substituted by an external firm or in a co-source partner. All that we can as a co-source partner bring expertise on using tools for independent process. So I think it is a joint effort from an internal audit team, and if you have an expertise internally, excellent. If not, then for those components, an external party can be involved in this process and work jointly. All right. So.
Thanks, Chetan. This was a wonderful session, and which is a highly relevant, especially today when the organizations are moving towards either the new systems are better and the more complex systems. So I'm sure our participants today will be using this knowledge and apply in their day-to-day work. Chetan, on behalf of IA Bombay chapter and all participants, I thank you for sharing your knowledge and for taking out time to give this webinar. We are grateful for you and we look forward to hear you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks Manoj and IAA for giving this opportunity. I will be happy if we start asking questions. That will be more than enough from as a takeaway from this session. So let's look back into our organizations and see how we can add value in this process. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a good day ahead, all of you, and have a great weekend as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chetan.